I spent
noticed
a
the
half
guy.
hour. Yeah, I spent a half hour trying to find the Mortal Kombat font, and I couldn't get the font. I could match the color exactly. I couldn't match the font. But the Mike Tyson, if you've ever, and maybe have you ever played the original Mike
Sure.
Tyson's Punch Out?
When you said it, I was like, I've heard about it. I'm aware of it. I never played it.
Oh, it's brilliant. So this is where I think, because this is where I'm slightly older than you, and I think this is that Nintendo gap. I think you were a Sega generation, and I started right when Nintendo came out. And this was the first game I really got into. It's a brilliant game, and it's one that I would love to play again. And in Mike Tyson's Punch Out, if you've never watched it or never played it, you have your fights and you go through the different fighters to get to Mike Tyson ultimately. And in between every fight, you train, and it's you and your trainer, and that's what happens in between every fight before the next fight comes up. So those of you who have played Mike Tyson's Punch Out, that's going to be quite an enjoyable piece. I played it to another friend of mine who had played Mike Tyson's Punch Out, and he said it was spot on. So so it's we have Usman Burns. I think what I want to do is let you lead the way because you are the expert on our resident expert on the Fight Companion. So what did you think?
Yeah, great fight. So I'll put that right out there. Really great fight, full of action. I knew from the get-go that Burns was going to put it down. Like he wasn't going to hold back. And I think in many ways it was part of his downfall, which he admitted in the post-fight press conference, which was that he got a little bit excited when he floored him. So he kind of got Usman down to his knee, which I can't remember the last time I see it. It doesn't happen very often. No. And he's got a granite chin. So he floored him, and I think he got a bit excited. He blew his load a little bit, and then Usman settled down. Usman just played it so well. I don't know if you picked this up, Sean, but when he got hurt, Gilbert went to his back. And what a lot of people do, if you're good at standing up, you'll say, get up. But obviously, in this context, because he was still hurt, he kept him down. Wasn't really doing much, but just kept him down just to get his recovery and get his vision back and get his breath back. But I thought Burns did really well. That another fight would be interesting to see, especially with Burns going in a little bit more calculated, although still pressing the action. But I think one of the highlights was Usman's jab. It looked so strong from the get-go. He's got a reach advantage over him.
He does.
His new training camp with Trevor Whitman is a boxing coach, and again, he would have only been improving that. So Kamaru, what I liked as well, we saw some leg kicks and we saw a side kick. You don't see that. Usman, what he would tend to do, Sean, is he'll stand up like that with Kobe Covington. He stood up. Or he'll, like with Woodley, he'll grab you and he's going to ragdoll you for 5 rounds. Now, he doesn't want to play that game with Burns because Burns was like, come and grab a hold of me because I'll rip your arm off. So it was mainly a stand-up affair, which is what I kind of expected. But Burns is, Joe summed it up beautifully. Burns is he's faster and he's just got more tools like head kicks and spinning. He's more explosive than Usman. Usman's a little bit more conventional, but a great fight. Well done. Usman looked fantastic. I would still watch that fight again. I felt Burns accounted himself well, but there's enough in it for him to think, okay, I could go back and do a better job again.
Yeah. I did because I have to go back and I have to research sort of these fighters beforehand. You have a bit more knowledge on kind of what to expect. And when I went into the fight, I think, and I'm just going to share my ignorance.
Please.
I didn't. So I looked at it as sort of a one-sided thing from what I was reading and seeing between Gilbert Burns and Usman. Usman was Burns is an impressive character. Usman reminds me of if Anthony Joshua were to be the dominant boxer he could be, Usman would be his sort of counterpart in MMA. He's doesn't really get too involved in the chatter too much, but he will. He's a very sort of A-type personality, respectful person. He is a specimen. He is a beast, and he's just got that knockout punching power. And when I watched his fights and I watched Burns' fights, and I went back into their history and looked at sort of their wins. And if you look at Usman, he wins a lot by technical knockouts and knockouts. And when I looked at their skill set, if you look at sort of them on paper, Burns is definitely a grapper. I think it's wrestling jiu-jitsu, whereas Usman, his forte on the UFC website is wrestling. But he's a very good boxer. And I think Burns was a much better boxer than I expected him to be on the night. Okay. Even from the other fights I've seen. Because a lot of his wins, he doesn't win by knockout much at all when you look at the fight notes, or if you watch the fights. There's a lot of he has a lot more attempted takedowns, a lot more attempted submissions, whereas you see a lot from Usman, get him on the ground and then pound him to oblivion. So I was surprised at the start of the fight to see, it almost looked to me, he's not knowing Usman. My initial thought was, it kind of reminded me of the start of the fight that Chandler won, where Gilbert seemed to have Usman sort of on the ropes a bit, and Usman seemed a bit tentative or sort of unsure how to take on. It was almost like he didn't want to hit his mate. And I know that's not the case, but that was just sort of the thing that was bounding around my head. And as the fight started, Gilbert was really just the combinations he was landing, and what Rogan was saying on the broadcast was Gilbert he thought he had better combinations, or he was a better combination boxer as far as his punching and kick combinations. And as the fight went on, I think that was the one thing I noticed you mentioned, was that where he had him down on his knee, and there was two things that were happening. I thought Usman didn't want to entertain. There was that period where he was sort of staying on his back, trying to invite Usman down, and Usman was, and I thought at first, and I hadn't thought about that until you said that, I thought Usman, having trained with him, felt like if I go on the ground with Burns, I thought at the time he was worried that was the only spot where Burns had maybe not an advantage, but they were on equal standing because of the reach.
Probably had an advantage. Yeah.
I didn't think about the rest element though, because that played massively into it, because there was a good 1 minute, maybe 2 minute period in that fight. It was a long time where he was just standing there, and he was able to get his shit together during that time. And I think Burns probably would have been better getting up and just starting to throw combinations.
Can I add a couple of points there, Sean? Because I agree with you. So you had the rest element. 2, he actually made Burns back up, which you never see. So on the floor, normally, the ref would stop. You heard the ref, because he'll normally call it. If nothing's really happening, he'll say, right, get up then. Either get on top of him and do something, or allow him to get up. So the ref did say something, take some action. He kind of did this little come on. But Usman was doing enough punching in, and he actually caught Gilbert a couple of times, and Gilbert backed up and was like, oh, I saw that, yeah. So the other thing oh damn, what was I going to say? I lost my head. I have a really good point here. Damn it, I can't remember what I was going to say. There was 2 really important factors. So being on the ground.
I said I got the impression.
Sorry, I've got it, mate. Sorry, I've got it. It's also the psychology from the judge's point of view. So Usman got hit down and got back up again, but then they're seeing Gilbert on his back on the floor, and Usman is at that point dictating. I'm kind of telling you where I'm going. So it looks like he had a minute and a half of dominant positioning. So that was something that was swaying the round in his favor for that factor. So he had the rest element. It looks dominant. And actually he started, and it looked extra dominant when he got Gilbert to back up. So that was so clever, because Usman was in trouble when he got rocked. And that it could have finished there, and that could have happened, and we would have been just singing Gilbert's praises. So yeah, I have to give that was real champ play, the way he mapped that out.
Yeah, the turnaround was which I read and I actually heard in a few of the post-match interviews that Usman gets stronger as the fight goes on. So there was an expectation, if he got through that first round, which I didn't know this watching the fight, I'm still learning the characters, that he was in good shape, as it was going to be harder for Burns to get a foot in. And I think at that point, that's when you saw Usman really start to change things up a bit. He was a bit more the aggressor, I think, for the second and third round. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I thought actually there's fair point that he could have won all 3. Although Gilbert really did do a great job in round 1 as well. I felt that
I thought he won round 1. I thought Burns won round
Gilbert.
1. No, I thought he did.
Yeah, well, I think it could have gone both ways with the judges' side of things, with seeing him on the ground and getting backed up a little bit. I think it was a very close round. That's one of those ones I'd say I wouldn't be, if they said, oh no, it was Usman, I don't think you'd be disgusted by that. He wasn't robbed, but 2 and 3 were a lot more one-sided. Actually, Gilbert was getting beaten up at the end of 2, and I felt hadn't recovered enough from 1, from round 2 when he came into the 3rd round. One thing I'll add as well, Sean, for a little bit of context on this, is that Kamaru Usman isn't a particularly popular champion, although now he has broken a record. He's renowned as a little bit of a boring fighter, a little bit more like Mourinho, just a tough guy. He comes in, he's got a bit of a conventional boxing style. It's not that exciting. He doesn't really kick. And then with some people, he just grabs a hold of them and ragdolls them and beats them up. He doesn't really there's no flashy knockouts. There isn't much panache, but he's just this dogged guy. You just basically don't want to get in a fight with him. And he just churns out results. Now, I think a result like that today, and seeing a little bit more of what he has in his arsenal with the kicks coming out, and that he wasn't going down the grappling game. He was stood out, and his jab looked phenomenal.
He didn't want anything to do with the grappling game. That's where I thought he wasn't necessarily being the aggressor. I thought in the first round, Usman was not, of course, not nervous to go in, but was not willing. It was almost as if Burns was trying to get Usman to come down to his level, and Usman was not taking that opportunity. And I didn't feel like he was being the aggressor necessarily. I thought they were both not being the aggressor at that stage. They were both trying to pull each other into the game that they were trying to play.
I think Gilbert backs him. Like, this is another thing about MMA as well. You might see this in future, is that Gilbert is a world-renowned grappler. Like, with regards to jiu-jitsu, former world champ, he knows what he's doing. You don't want to mess around with a guy like that. Technically, you don't want to be getting wrestling with someone like that.
Yeah.
And then on the stand-up game, you learn some stand-up, and he becomes quite accomplished. And then they get it's this new exciting thing they're doing on the side, and they want to showcase their skills because they're learning this new skill. And you'll get grapplers that learn some boxing that have got a really good right hand or something. They'll just have a technique that's really good, or a good high kick or something, and they'll just want to show that off. And I'm not saying that happened here. I expected Gilbert to go in and kickbox with Kamaru, but it would have been interesting to see. And this is where I love fighting, because can you imagine, Sean, already what would happen in matchup number 2? What would Gilbert Burns do differently? Now, would we see Gilbert again keep the pressure on like he did in round 1, but be a little bit more measured? And 2, would you think it would make sense to do more takedowns? Not that he'll take Usman down, because he's a tank and he might not be able to do that, but get into that grappling exchange and get a hold of him to try and instigate some jiu-jitsu. So that's what would be interesting to see. But I'm not surprised with Gilbert with his stand-up, because he's got a lot of power and speed, and he's knocked legit people out. So
the fact that he got in, the fact that he was able to get that close that early on surprised me from what I've seen from the other Kamaru fights. I watched the Covington fight, and what really impressed me about Usman were the creative combinations he was throwing, and how well he disguised, his jabs, and he was able to get a lot of those punches in, by baiting and switching which hand he was going to throw. And I thought, as a boxer, I think I was surprised when I saw the fights and then read that he was a wrestler first, because I thought Usman looked every bit a world-class boxer. And when I looked at the history of takedowns in Burns, I thought Burns was going to want to. I was surprised that fight was starting as a boxing match. I thought Burns was going to be trying to get them onto the ground and try to mitigate some of that skill and some of that reach he had. So fair play to Burns, being able to land those punches. And I think had he remained the aggressor, it definitely would have been a different outcome. I think he could have finished it in that first round. He was definitely rocked. And I remember thinking, why is he spending so much time on his back? Because every second he was on. I mean, I guess that was from my end as an ignorant fight fan. I didn't quite understand the thinking behind that.
It wouldn't have been even, because you mentioned you felt it might be evenly matched. It wouldn't have been evenly matched. Kamaru knew that if he played that game, Gilbert can absolutely tap him out, and he knew that from what we saw was evidence that that's happened in the gym. So he respected his grappling to the extent that he didn't want anything to do with grappling. So he knows that if he plays that game, he may be able to stop Gilbert, but you know what? He might not. Whilst in a stand-up situation, he backed himself enough to I can outbox and out kickbox this guy, and he almost didn't have that. Like he was close to losing that fight in the first round.
Yeah, but that change of of dominant hand and I didn't think about it this way as well. What I heard a few of the announcers saying, by changing his stance, by changing his dominant hand, he put his strong arm forward as his jab, which really prevented, I think, Burns from getting in. He had that jab was pretty much doing damage and playing defense all at the same time, and I think Burns had a hell of a time finding a way in. And as soon as he landed a few of those jabs, I think that changed everything. I think from that point on, Burns was just didn't really have an answer for that change. And I don't know if that's something maybe he didn't do that in training with Burns.
Again, I'm not an expert with stand-up. This is a level that I don't know as much about. But when you're standing like with your left arm forward, you have to be positioned. You have to move your body so that you're off center. And if you're changing stance, then you position yourself to the other side. So you've always got to be off center with the opponent. So if they change footing, that puts you off to the other side, and now you're worrying about a different combination. So it is more complicated than people give credit as well. Like when you're used to, when you already start out and you're just going orthodox versus orthodox, you could get used to that, and then you throw a southpaw in it. You're like, oh, this is all backwards. This is weird. It is strange. Now, I'm also going to say something slightly controversial, perhaps, in that I don't think Kamaru Usman yet is. I don't think his blessing is that he's so talented at boxing. I think his blessing is that he has a fantastic reach and he is super powerful. So if he's catching you, you are gonna feel it. So I'm not saying that he's not technical and not good boxer. I'm just saying that I don't think it's his technique which really stands him head and shoulders above everyone else. I think he has that extra reach advantage, and there's power and pop at the end of it. So if you get caught by it, like, look out. I don't see him piecing up, the best stand-up people in MMA. Like Israel Adesanya, I think would eat him alive in a stand-up. But Usman, for that weight division in particular, is super powerful, and his technique is good. And with Trevor Whitman, it's only going to go one way. You'll see a better and better version of him in the next two fights with the stand-up technically now. And if he keeps his power as well, he's always got that wrestling to go to. He's a powerful force. And the thing about this fight that's made it interesting is that Gilbert Burns had to stand up to trouble Usman, which we saw in the first few minutes. But he also had the grappling. He had that edge. Now, I'm thinking of the other fighters in the division. It's tough to say, like Kobe Covington rematch, but I'm struggling to see someone that's going to really push Usman.